Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. Let's get started. India's new infections are falling, but that's hardly any relief. With 4,500 plus deaths in a single day, India has registered the worst single-day fatality figures for any country in the world. And the virus continues to spread rampantly. Many states in India have a very high positivity rate. The focus should remain then on ramping up medical capacity and vaccinating more and more people. In the past few days, we've reported extensively on how India's clinical protocols need an upgrade. From plasma therapy to HCQ, how the Indian Council of Medical Research, or ICMR, needs to follow scientific evidence and shape its guidelines accordingly. And every time we broadcast a report like this, the question of Remdesivir was always raised by you. A lot of you wrote to us. Does it work? Why is there a shortage? Who needs it? And what do studies say? So in the past few days, we've spoken to many doctors and experts, and we've come up with a report for you. On Gravitas tonight, we'll discuss why Remdesivir remains a contentious drug, what the conflicting studies mean, and what is the best course of action for India. Also on the show, 10 days of fighting and no sign of a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. Who is funding this fight? Where is Hamas getting its weapons and money from? What is Joe Biden's playbook for West Asia? We'll bring you a special report on that. Embarrassment for India after Delhi Chief Minister Kejriwal says Singapore variant is infecting children and India should block flights. The Foreign Minister of India says he does not speak for the country. Sri Lanka's Supreme Court says the Chinese port city bill is inconsistent with their constitution. What does it mean for the project and for the Rajapaksas? And what's up with WhatsApp in India? The government says it violates India's... What next for this company? We'll discuss that. We begin as always with...
The Indian naval ship Kochi rescued 185 people stranded at sea, days after a barge when Cyclone Tautai barreled into the country. At least 61 people have been killed as the cyclone left a trail of destruction across states of Maharashtra and Gujarat. Rescue operations are underway, with the Indian Navy searching for missing workers. Singapore has authorized the use of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine for those aged between 12 to 15 years in a bid to extend protection to more vulnerable groups. This as the city-state tackles a rise in infections, followed by tightened restrictions on social gatherings and closure of schools. Opposing the Tokyo Games, the head of a medical group which represents more than 100,000 doctors and dentists in Japan says that it is almost impossible to send medical workers to the Olympics due to low number of fully vaccinated doctors and nurses. This as the government faces criticism for its slow vaccination drive in the face of rising COVID-19 infections. The United Arab Emirates to offer a third Sinopharm shot to people who have already got 2 doses amid concerns over the efficacy of the Chinese jab. China's Sinopharm won the WHO support for its vaccine this month, but concerns remain over its efficacy. The New York State Attorney General's office has opened a criminal probe into former President Donald Trump's company, increasing the legal risk for Trump and his family. The Trump Organization is being investigated for possible extensive and protracted criminal conduct, including tax and insurance fraud. Eicher Motors owned Royal Enfield will recall more than 236,000 motorcycles across some models due to defects in the ignition coil that can cause misfiring and, in rare cases, an electric short circuit. The popular brand will recall its Meteor, Classic and Bullet models sold in India, Thailand, Indonesia, Australia and a few other countries. President Rodrigo Duterte says the Philippines would not waver in defense of its interests in the South China Sea, despite barring his ministers from talking about the situation there in public. This as the Philippines faces maritime incursions from China, while the president hopes to secure Chinese investment. A heat wave with temperatures of 30 degrees Celsius attracted Russians to sunbathe and splash in the fountains in Moscow. Meteorologists says the capital's hot weather can be attributed to the influence of dry and warm air masses from Central Asia and an anticyclone. Chelsea have given their Premier League top four hopes a massive boost by beating rivals Leicester City 2-1 at Stamford Bridge. Antonio Rudiger and Jorginho scored in the second half to put the hosts in control before Leicester pulled a goal back. Chelsea are now in third place and in control of their own fate, but Leicester are in danger of missing out on the Champions League next season even if they win their final game. The Boston Celtics have secured the 7th seed in the NBA in the Eastern Conference playoffs with a 118-100 victory over Washington Wizards. The two teams were separated by only 2 points at halftime, but the Celtics turned up the heat in the third quarter and never looked back. Jaden Tatum was the star with 50 points, 32 of them in the second half. The Celtics will face second seeds Brooklyn Nets in round 1 of the playoffs.
Tuesday was the deadliest day for India. The Wuhan virus took more than 4,500 lives, the highest daily death toll for any country anywhere in the world in this pandemic. India's total death toll since last year is now more than 280,000. So while new infections may show a dip, the fatalities are only rising. In the last 24 hours, India added more than 267,000 new cases. These numbers have been falling since Monday. Active cases fell by more than 100,000 again. Over 300,000 people recovered yesterday. Close to 22 million people have recovered overall. What does this data tell you? New infections may have dropped, but the virus is still spreading. 22 states in India are reporting a high positivity rate of 15%. It means that 15 out of 100 people are testing positive. So the lockdowns are not going away in a hurry. How's the rest of the world faring? Many countries are opening up. Last week, America revoked the mask mandate. Now, the European Union is reopening its borders to the world. The bloc wants to allow fully vaccinated travelers. But there's a catch. They will only allow those who have taken vaccines approved by the European Union. Which are these vaccines? Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, and Oxford AstraZeneca. So if you have taken the full course of any of these 4 shots, you can travel to Europe. But if you have taken a Chinese or a Russian vaccine, Europe is still making up its mind about these, about the Sputnik shot. And it may have a reason to avoid the Chinese vaccine. The UAE and Bahrain have widely used the Sinopharm vaccine, the one that came from China, and they're already gearing up to administer a 3rd dose. A booster shot to a small group of people. Why do they need it right now? Because these people failed to develop any antibodies, even after they took both their shots. Both countries today made a simultaneous announcement. Those who got the Chinese vaccine at least 6 months back can register themselves for a booster shot. In recent weeks, we've also reported extensively on India's treatment protocols and how outdated India's approach has been. First, we told you about how overrated plasma therapy is, and this week India dropped blood plasma from its treatment protocols. We also reported on how ineffective drugs like HCQ and ivermectin are still in use in India. And many of you wrote to us asking about Remdesivir. Does it work at all? Is it useless and overhyped? Does every patient need Remdesivir? We spoke to many doctors and experts. We consulted multiple studies, and tonight we'll share some of the answers with you. But before we do that, I want to show you some reports. This one, the first one, came out 4 days ago. More than 100 patients were given fake Remdesivir injections in the Indian state of Madhya Pradesh. Fake Remdesivir. More than 90% of them survived. These injections were supplied by a criminal gang. But the fact that these people survived shows that they probably never needed Remdesivir after all. Then we have this report. The chairperson of one of India's top hospitals says Remdesivir does not help. Speaking to a news agency today, the chairperson of Gangaram Hospital said that just like blood plasma, Remdesivir could be dropped from India's treatment protocols. In fact, there are a lot of similarities between blood plasma and Remdesivir. Both emerged as the go-to treatment options at the beginning of this pandemic. Both are being widely prescribed by doctors, and both have been widely studied and debated. So is Remdesivir an ineffective cure just like blood plasma? The jury is still out on this one. There is conflicting evidence on Remdesivir. Just like almost all drugs for the treatment of the Wuhan virus, Remdesivir has been repurposed. This drug is made by America's Gilead Sciences. It was originally developed to treat hepatitis C. Then scientists tested it in the treatment for Ebola. But the drug did not really perform well. So its use never really took off. Then the Wuhan virus came around, and Remdesivir received some high-level endorsements, like the one from America's top infectious disease expert, Dr. Anthony Fauci. In April last year, Dr. Fauci said that Remdesivir sets a new standard of care for Wuhan virus patients. A few months down the line, the World Health Organization conducted its own trial. Guess what they found? Remdesivir had, quote-unquote, little or no effect on patient mortality, which means it can do little to prevent death. In fact, the WHO had the same assessment for a host of drugs like HCQ, lopinavir, and ritonavir. Listen to this.
The interim results from the Solidarity Therapeutics trial indicate that Remdesivir, hydroxychloroquine, lopinavir, interferon regimens appear to have little or no effect on 28-day mortality or the in-hospital course of COVID-19 among hospitalized patients.
So who is right? Dr. Fauci or the WHO? The answer is neither. Doctors are using Remdesivir for entirely different purposes. They use it not to kill the virus, but to stop it from spreading any further in the human body. A study published in The Lancet last year looked into the use of Remdesivir in Wuhan virus patients with hypertension. It says this drug is effective, but it works only if it is given within 10 days of the infection. And not everyone needs Remdesivir. It is given to patients who need oxygen, those who have developed a pneumonia in their lungs but do not need a ventilator. So Remdesivir does not help those who are asymptomatic. It doesn't help the patients who have mild symptoms. It also doesn't help patients who are very serious. It only works, if at all, for moderately ill patients. But just like the case of blood plasma, doctors are prescribing it widely. Remdesivir is being given to those who may not even need it, because even doctors are under a lot of pressure. They want to try everything possible to save a patient, everything available. And the result is this. There's a sudden shortage of Remdesivir, a shortage that has spawned a black market in India. This drug used to retail in India for not more than 3,500 rupees. That's around $50 for a single vial. But towards the end of April, one vial of Remdesivir was being sold for 10 times this price in the black market. And desperate families were shelling out as much as 30,000 rupees for one injection. 30,000 rupees, that's more than $400. How many shots does a patient need? 6 in most cases, which means if you do the math, you will need 180,000 rupees for the entire course, almost $2,500. That's also, by the way, how much this drug, Remdesivir, costs in America. A 5-day course of the treatment is for $2,600. So the black marketing is bad enough. The shortage is aggravating India's suffering. But the question still remains, do we even need this drug? Can India afford to keep using Remdesivir, or can it do without it? We asked this question to Dr. Julian Tang. He's a clinical virologist at the University of Leicester, and he believes that since the window to administer this drug is so short, and patients are still struggling to find hospital beds and oxygen, Remdesivir may not prove to be as effective.
Remdesivir, I think if you give it early in those who are severely ill, then you can stop that virus replication, but you need that immune system clearance to clear the virus. And the problem is that when you have patients queuing to get into hospital who may have been ill for like 5, 7, 10 days, the benefits of Remdesivir, even on oxygen support, may be very minimal.
So will India drop Remdesivir from its treatment protocols? It looks unlikely at the moment. Earlier today, we spoke to Dr. Navneet Wig. He's the chairman of India's COVID task force. And he says just 7 to 8 patients out of a sample of 100 need Remdesivir in India. So just 7 to 8% of India's patients need it.
All mild patients are treated without Remdesivir, or all patients who are after 10 days of illness are treated without Remdesivir. All patients on mechanical ventilation are treated without Remdesivir. It is only this specific group of patient who worsens, saturation falls, and in first 10 day of illness is hospitalized, requiring low flow oxygen is the indication for Remdesivir. And then if you see out of 100, only 7-8 patients will require it. So this is that is the minimal amount. But what has happened is patients' relative force and doctors are forced, and sometimes they think it is a magic bullet. It is not a magic bullet.
You heard that. It is not a magic bullet. Don't force doctors. And we still don't have any drug that specifically works for this virus. Medical science is yet to make any advances in finding a good antiviral drug. And until that happens, doctors have to use what they've got. So Remdesivir is not a magic bullet. It has a limited impact and only on a few patients. What does it tell you? Doctors must be judicious in its use, and patients should not push for this therapy unless they absolutely need it. Let's talk about what's happening in West Asia. It is beyond grim, and I'm at a loss for words, to be honest. It's not easy to report on violence you see every day, let alone live it. And we can only try to imagine what people in this region are suffering. On this show, we have reported non-stop on the escalating fight between Israel and Hamas. And we have been showing you pictures from both sides, giving you insights into grim details. Why are we doing this? It is because we hope that soon we'll be able to come back to you and tell you that the exchange of fire is over, that people no longer have to run to bomb shelters, and that finally there is peace. Unfortunately, today is not that day. As we speak, fire rages on in West Asia. Can we call it a war? A fight to protect one's land? Is Hamas using Palestinians as human shields? Is Israel using disproportionate force? There are no clear answers to these questions except one. What's happening in West Asia is a humanitarian crisis. In the last 24 hours, a journalist has been killed. 2 foreign workers have lost their lives. Allow me to quickly recap the events for you. Airstrikes and rocket fire continued last night. Hamas fired rockets towards the Israeli cities of Ashdod, Ashkelon and Shephelah. Israel roped in 52 aircraft, bombarded Gaza non-stop for 25 minutes. What you see is the video released by the Israeli Defense Forces, and they claim to have destroyed 9 rocket launchers and a tunnel system used by the Hamas. This is what Gaza looks like after the overnight assault. A family home has been leveled. At least 6 people have died. Among them is a journalist. He worked at a local radio station. His father says the son never carried a weapon.
It's all a lie. The Israelis never warned us. The house was bombed directly. My son never carried a weapon and he did nothing. He was a journalist and radio station worker.
On the Israeli side, 2 workers from Thailand have died. They were struck by incoming rockets. As we speak, new fronts have been opened. The fight spread to the Mediterranean this morning. This, what you see, is the Israeli Navy firing off the coast of Gaza. There is also a parallel offensive online. Rockets are being fired on social media. Let me show you. This is the official Twitter handle of the State of Israel, and here's what it has been tweeting. Rockets, more rockets, and then some more. It says, and I'm quoting, "Just to give you some perspective, these are the total number of rockets shot at Israeli citizens." It goes on to say, "Every rocket has an address. What if the address was yours? Hashtag Israel under attack." In another tweet, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said, if democracies attack Israel instead of Hamas, they will be rewarding terrorism. Netanyahu recently also addressed some foreign envoys. The Prime Minister had a PowerPoint presentation for them. Take a look at this.
We try to target those who target us with great precision. That is not as surgical an operation as it is. Even in a surgical room in a hospital, you don't have the ability to prevent collateral damage around affected tissues. Even then you can't. And certainly in a military operation you cannot. But there is no army in the world that does more than the Israeli army, in the Israeli security services, in prevent collateral damage.
Promises of precision and preventing collateral damage cannot undo what's already done. We've spoken at length about how the ongoing violence has taken its toll on children. More than 62 children have been killed in the conflict so far. The ones who escaped the rockets and airstrikes have been traumatized for life. This is Suzy Ishkon Tana. She's 7 years old. Her home was destroyed by Israeli airstrikes. She saw her siblings and mother die. Suzy too was buried under the rubble. She was rescued 2 days ago.
We admitted her into the hospital and really, she was still in shock. She is in shock all the time. She refuses to speak, to eat or drink. Even with the father beside her, I think she will still be tired.
There are so many children like Suzy whose lives have been turned upside down in the last 1 week on both sides. Experts believe it will be really tough to get the children to forget what they've experienced.
Hundreds of thousands of children in Gaza are suffering every day from fear and anxiety and loss of sleep, of nightmares. I'm seeing this also with my own children, with the sounds of explosions and what they see on TV and on the phones of what's happening around. The sounds of explosions are very loud. The children are not used to this. My children, for example, cry and run to hide. It's very hard to get them to sleep. They're always attentive, listening to what's happening outside, paying attention and asking questions. Why is this happening? Is this going to end soon? Are we going to die?
Are we going to die? Imagine children asking these questions. Imagine children being put through this and their trauma being exploited for propaganda. That's another problem. It's the most unfortunate thing in the world, and it happens routinely here. This is the fourth major conflict between Israel and Hamas. And it's the people who are once again paying the price for it. At least 231 people have died so far, 219 in Palestine, 12 in Israel, 58,000 Palestinians displaced. And as we speak, the Gaza Strip has no COVID testing labs. They had one facility. It's been damaged in an airstrike. The crisis gets worse with every passing day. But there's still hope. The two sides can still arrive at a ceasefire. Diplomatic efforts are on, not going very far so far. The United Nations General Assembly is expected to meet tomorrow to discuss this. The Biden administration has asked Israel to wind down its offensive. According to the latest, US President Joe Biden has told Netanyahu that he expects a quote-unquote significant de-escalation today on the path to a ceasefire. The European Union has called for a ceasefire, so has Canada. There are also countries like Egypt that are trying to broker truce through private channels. But how are Israel and Gaza responding to these calls for peace? In his latest address to the media and to these diplomats that he spoke to, Prime Minister Netanyahu made no mention of halting the airstrike. As for Hamas, one of its senior officials told the New York Times that the group has sought a ceasefire. He said Hamas will agree to a quote-unquote simultaneous and mutual ceasefire. Israel has denied this report, as has a faction of the Hamas. So in short, there is no peace in sight 10 days into this fighting. And this may sound unpopular, but it's not easy being Israel's ally. Ask the United States of America, they know. Often called Israel's best friend, America provides Israel billions of dollars in aid annually. It backs Israel's military offensives publicly. It blocks United Nations Security Council resolutions against Israel consistently. In return, Israel protects American interests in West Asia. It shares intelligence on Islamic terrorism. It provides cutting-edge military technology. Plus, pro-Israel lobbies donate large sums of money to American politicians and influence policy. So call them what you may, natural allies or friends with benefits. The fact is, Israel and America share a relationship that has stood the test of time. But it's also proving to be a big test for the American president, a test that he wasn't prepared for right now. Watch this report.
On Monday, US President Joe Biden dialed Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. This was the second phone call in 3 days between the two leaders. He expressed support for Israel's right to self-defense and pushed for a ceasefire between the two sides. But what's making headlines from the White House readout of the phone call is this statement. He encouraged Israel to make every effort to ensure the protection of innocent civilians. An acknowledgement of the rising civilian casualties on the Palestinian side. A total of 219 Palestinians have died so far, including 63 children. On the Israeli side, the death toll stands at 12, including 2 children. Israel says the disparity is because Hamas is using civilians as a shield. Not everyone is convinced. In Washington, dozens of lawmakers have been questioning Biden's reluctance to publicly criticize Israel. They want him to push harder for an end to the fighting. This includes one of the frontrunners for the 2020 presidential election, Bernie Sanders. Last week, in a statement to the New York Times, Sanders said Benjamin Netanyahu has cultivated an increasingly intolerant and authoritarian type of racist nationalism. We can no longer be apologists for the right-wing Netanyahu government and its undemocratic and racist behavior. On another front, at least 28 Democratic senators issued a joint statement on Sunday, calling for an immediate ceasefire in Hamas. Some of the Democrats have even gone as far as to call Israel an apartheid state. Link the Palestinian issue to those of black Americans, and question why America is still selling weapons to Israel. On Tuesday, the Biden administration approved a potential $735 million weapons sale to Israel. On the same day, it also blocked a UN statement on Israel calling for a ceasefire. When asked for a clarification on these controversial steps, the White House said sometimes diplomacy happens behind the scenes.
As I've noted in the past, our focus and our strategy here is to work through quiet, intensive diplomacy. And he's been doing this long enough to know that the best way to end an international conflict is typically not to debate it in public. So we will continue to remain closely engaged behind the scenes.
America claims to be engaging behind the scenes, but is ironically and openly seeking proof from Israel for its actions. On Saturday, Israel struck the offices of 2 global media networks, claiming the building was also a safe haven for Hamas. The US State Department sought evidence for Israel's actions and then publicly said this when Israel failed to provide any proof.
You said that you've requested additional information. Have you received it? Have you seen it? And did you find it credible?
I've not seen any information provided. And again, to the extent that it is based on intelligence, that would have been shared with other colleagues, and I'll leave that to them to assess.
The fact is, America cannot criticize Israel beyond a point. Pro-Israel lobbies are among the biggest donors in American politics. They donate large sums of money to both Republicans and Democrats and influence decision-making at the highest levels. It doesn't matter who is in the White House. Jewish lobbies are said to dictate American politics. So, while Biden wants to appear to be making the right noises about Palestinian civilians, he won't take Israel to task. In fact, the resurgence of this conflict is the last thing he was expecting right now. He had focused foreign policy goals on containing China. He was preparing for a complete pullback from West Asia, appointed no top diplomat in Israel, no ambassador, not even a consul general. Now Washington is being forced to get more involved. It claims to be resolving the conflict behind the scenes, but in public view, it's far from even managing it. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
They say there are no winners in wars, but that's not strictly true. One group always ends up on the winning side. It's the people who bankroll the war. They sit far away from the battlefield and flash their checkbooks, while people on the ground suffer. What about the conflict in Gaza? Who is bankrolling it? Where does Hamas get their money and weapons from? Their biggest supporter is Qatar. And this should not come as a surprise. State-sponsored terrorism is trademark Qatar policy. In 2017, they were pulled up by a group of Muslim nations. They cut off diplomatic ties with Qatar and imposed a trade blockade. The blockade was lifted earlier this year, but those concerns still remain. Qatar supports Hamas both financially and politically. So far, they have transferred $1.8 billion to them, $1.8 billion. So you could say Qatar is sustaining the Gaza Strip. Since 2018, they have been paying $20 million per month. What is this money used for? On paper, it is used to pay civil servants, to make roads and hospitals, and to pay monthly stipends to people. But the fact is, there is no way to verify this. Hamas is not exactly filing audit reports, so we have to take their word for it. Money is Hamas's number one priority. Number two is recognition, and Qatar has been happy to indulge. In 2012, Sheikh Hamad bin Khalifa Al Thani visited the Gaza Strip. He was the first state leader to court the Hamas government. Even now, when the violence escalated, Hamas leaders were dispatched to Doha. They met Qatar's top diplomat to seek international backing. The other big supporters are Iran and Turkey, as expected, you would say. Last year, President Erdogan hosted Hamas's military chief. Now, this is a man with a $5 million bounty on his head. Guess who announced this bounty? Turkey's NATO ally, the United States. What about Iran? In 2018, they were paying $70 million per year. $70 million per year, that's around $6 million per month. This is in addition to the weapons sales, which we'll talk about in a bit. But the biggest source of Hamas's funding is humanitarian aid. This aid is intended for the people of Gaza, but it rarely reaches them. Hamas spends 55% of its budget on military, 55%. Just 5% is allocated for rehabilitating its people. It's the same story with taxes. Hamas collects $27 million in taxes, and most of it is used to pay their fighters and workers. So the benefits have not reached the people. Now we come to the weapons. Hamas prides itself as a militant group. So where do they get their rockets from? Mostly Iran. Hamas used to smuggle Iranian rockets through Egypt and Sudan. But both these countries have a new regime, so Hamas had to look elsewhere. Today, they make their own rockets and they source the materials and technology from Hezbollah in Lebanon, again funded by Iran. By all estimates, Hamas has around 10,000 rockets in their arsenal. They're mostly short-range missiles. You could get one for $800. And this is where Israel is bleeding money. Hamas is sending up cheap rockets from Gaza, but Israel has to deploy the Iron Dome to respond. And Iron Dome missiles are not cheap. Each one of them costs thousands of dollars. The bottom line is this: Hamas is loaded. They siphon millions of dollars from aid. They get monthly payments from Iran and Qatar, and not to mention $27 million in taxes. That's what they raise. Now compare this to the ground situation in Gaza. What are the living standards of the people in Gaza? Let me pull up some numbers for you. Gaza's population is just over 2 million. The poverty rate is 56%, which means 1 million people, more than 1 million people, are living in poverty. Half the population of Gaza. What about unemployment? 50%. Half the people of Gaza do not have jobs. They don't have enough schools or hospitals either. There are just 11 big hospitals in Gaza. So 11 hospitals for 2 million people. Same with schools. They're overstretched. Almost 85% of all schools in Gaza run double shifts. And more than half, more often than not, in fact, they work without electricity. But their worries do not end there. The people of Gaza live in constant fear. An Israeli rocket or a Hamas misfire is just seconds away. Gaza is the perfect example of a poor land with rich rulers. Hamas is the third richest terror group in the world. They earn $700 million every year. $700 million. Saving the people of Gaza is not beyond Hamas. But that would mean shelving their military ambitions. A victory against Israel is not in Hamas's hands, but giving their people, the people of Gaza, a better life. That's something that Hamas can do. But in the pursuit of statehood, Hamas is forgetting who that state is for. A tweet has brought global embarrassment to India. A chief minister has put a long-standing partnership at risk, and his irresponsible behavior has also endangered India's diplomatic record. The chief minister in question is Mr. Arvind Kejriwal. The partnership we're talking about is India's goodwill that it shares with Singapore. And the irresponsible behavior here is alluding to the variant first found in India as that of Singapore's, plus creating panic that the same variant could come back to India in the form of a third wave and endanger children. This is a regrettable story, but a story that must be told.
A little knowledge is a dangerous thing. Here's a story that has redefined this phrase. On Monday, we told you that Singapore was shutting down all schools after the COVID variant first detected in India was found to be infecting children. We gave you the numbers. Only 38 locally transmitted cases had been reported. 38. And 4 children from a cluster at a tuition center had contracted the double mutant variant. 4. What's the population of Singapore? 5.7 million. How many cases has Singapore reported in total? 61,000. For a country that has limited the case count to mere thousands. For a country that just last month was named the safest place during the pandemic. 38 cases is indeed cause for concern. So Singapore shut down schools. And some in India misread this as a doomsday warning. Take the Chief Minister of New Delhi, Arvind Kejriwal. He put out this tweet on Tuesday, saying that the new form of the virus in Singapore could come to India as a third wave. He even appealed to the central government to cancel all flights to Singapore. What again is the name of the strain being reported in Singapore? The B1617, a double variant that was first discovered in India. What again is the status of flights between India and Singapore? They're already cancelled. Most international flights to India have been suspended since March 2021. India does not even have an air bubble arrangement with Singapore. The only flights operating are under the Vande Bharat mission that are bringing stranded Indians back. Not only did the Chief Minister embarrass himself, he also embarrassed India. This is how Singapore's Foreign Ministry has responded. The MFA regrets the unfounded assertions made on Facebook and Twitter by Chief Minister of Delhi Arvind Kejriwal that a variant of COVID-19 found in Singapore was particularly harmful to children and could cause a third wave of infections in India. MFA is disappointed that a prominent political figure had failed to assert the facts before making such claims. There is no Singapore variant. The humiliation did not end there. Singapore's foreign minister posted this, suggesting that politicians should stick to facts. Attached was a link to a news article. with a headline that reads, "Coronavirus variants are spreading in India." The comments drive home the point. Sample this. "We helped India with oxygen generators and this is the response we have in return." The government of Singapore has raised strong objections with the Indian High Commissioner. The Foreign Minister of India has himself been forced to clarify. Dr. S. Jaishankar has reiterated how irresponsible comments can damage long-standing partnerships, and very categorically stated that the Chief Minister of Delhi does not speak for India. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
The world recently celebrated International Nurses Day. Tweets, messages, celebratory videos were all shared, all hailing the frontline workers. In Delhi, nurses were felicitated. Do you know what happened next? Nurses turned around and said, while rewarding them and awarding them is good, authorities should first pay them their salaries. Several nurses in India's capital city have not been paid for 2 to 3 months. And this is a story not unique to Delhi. It looks like the story may be the same elsewhere too, in other countries too. Tonight we have a report from the United Kingdom. Remember last year, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson was admitted to the ICU with COVID complications. The nurse who looked after him has now quit. This is after the Boris Johnson government proposed a 1% pay hike for NHS workers.
Do you remember the NHS clap? Last year, Britain clapped for its nurses. On the 12th of May, the United Kingdom joined the world in celebrating nurses. Prime Minister Boris Johnson called them extraordinary. His government celebrated the nurses as heroes. But when it came to paying them, thanking the nurses for their selfless effort, Britain chose to give them a 1% pay hike. This video is from April 2020. Days after this clap was recorded, Boris Johnson had to be moved to ICU because of COVID-19 complications. A nurse named Jenny McGee was tasked with caring for the Prime Minister. Reports say that she was by Johnson's bedside as he fought the Wuhan virus. The Prime Minister thanked Jenny McGee in his message to the world post-recovery.
I hope they won't mind if I mention in particular 2 nurses who stood by my bedside for 48 hours when things could have gone either way. They're Jenny from New Zealand, Invercargill on the South Island to be exact, and Luis from Portugal near Porto.
McGee was also invited to 10 Downing Street when the NHS marked 72 years. Jenny McGee has now quit her job. The government of Boris Johnson has proposed a 1% pay rise for McGee and the rest of the NHS staff. A petty 1% pay hike is Britain's gift to its nurses for helping the country fight the Wuhan virus, for nursing the UK back to health after the spread of a dangerous variant. Nurses' unions are calling this a kick in the teeth. It's disrespectful, says McGee. She has now taken up a job in the Caribbean. We are not getting the respect and now the pay that we deserve. I'm just sick of it, so I've handed in my resignation. Many may be following suit. A survey has shown that the nursing staff across the UK are unhappy with their pay. 36% are considering quitting the profession. In 2019, the number was 27%. Of them, 61% are citing pay. So how has the government reacted to all of this? A spokesperson said that the government is grateful for the care that the NHS has provided, and so they have been exempted from the public sector-wide pay freeze. That's wonderful. Getting the economy back on track while also filling the palace purse must be really tough. It's a royal problem most countries won't understand. What we do understand is that showing some gratitude is not that difficult. It also goes a long way. A 1% pay hike for frontline workers who have put their lives at stake to save others is downright insulting. The people of Britain may end up paying the price for the government's refusal to pay its nurses. Established nurses from the EU are already leaving the UK. There has been an 89% decline in the number of European Economic Area nurses applying to work in the United Kingdom. A 91% drop in the EU and EEA applicants to the nursing and midwifery register. Losing healthcare workers to the government's ingratitude. Well, that will be a first this pandemic. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Saved by the court, at least for now. That's the only way to describe what's happening in Sri Lanka. The island is on a highway to becoming a Chinese colony. First the Hambantota port and now port city Colombo. Both are strategic assets. One of them is already under Chinese control, that's Hambantota. The other could soon follow if the government has its way. Let's give you some background first. What exactly is the Colombo port city? It is a special financial zone being built next to Colombo, mostly on land reclaimed from the sea. They're calling it the next Dubai. And looking at the plans, we can understand why. This is a city from the future. It is powered by renewable energy. There is a financial center, an international island, and a sprawling park right in the middle. It all sounds good. But just one problem. Port City Colombo is a Chinese project. It is part of President Xi Jinping's Belt and Road Initiative, BRI. You see, Beijing is not looking for a partnership in Sri Lanka. It wants an overseas province. And Sri Lanka has seen this happen before. And this is exactly how they lost the Hambantota port. They signed massive deals with the Chinese, but when it was time to pay up, they had no money. So the question is, will this time be any different? The government of Sri Lanka is dead set on pushing ahead. The project has been exempted from local laws, and earlier this year, a special bill was submitted for the port city. It is called the Colombo Port City Economic Commission Bill. The government wants to get it passed as quickly as possible, but the opposition is not on board. They say the bill will create a Chinese colony in Sri Lanka. So what did they do? They filed a petition in the Supreme Court, and thankfully for Sri Lanka, the court came through. They found parts of this bill, and I'm quoting, inconsistent with the Constitution. So the government now has two options. One, stick with the current version, in which case the bill will need a referendum to pass, a nationwide vote. The second option is to amend the proposal to bring it in line with the Constitution of Sri Lanka. Now, the government is very keen to avoid a referendum, from what we understand. So they are expected to table an amended bill in Parliament. And with the kind of majority that they have, passing it should be a cakewalk. But Sri Lanka's problems do not end there. The Colombo Port Bill is a deeply flawed legislation. And let me tell you why. The bill wants to create a 7-member commission to administer the port city. This would be an all-powerful commission. It would control everything from taxation to approving new projects and investments. So the obvious question is, who appoints this commission? President Gotabaya Rajapaksa. This bill gives him the authority to put foreigners on the board, effectively handing over power to Chinese officials. And Beijing is lobbying very hard for this. Last month, the Chinese defense minister visited Sri Lanka. He met both President Gotabaya and Prime Minister Mahinda. The visit was a nudge from China to speed things along. But this new Supreme Court order is a setback. The court demanded a number of amendments, but one of them stands out. The first version reduced Sri Lankan regulators to mere spectators. They had to rubber stamp decisions of the Port City Commission. The amended version gives real powers to regulators. But this is hardly a saving grace. China has already pumped in millions into the project. They have reclaimed the land. They have built the high rises. So expecting them to give up control is futile at this point. Like most of China's so-called partnerships, this too will come due. The Supreme Court order only delays the inevitable, because Sri Lanka is setting itself up for Hambantota 2.0. One of the most watched videos in the history of YouTube is set to disappear on the 23rd of May. It will be sold at an auction as a work of art and in the form of an NFT. Which video are we talking about, and what is an NFT? The answers lie in our next report.
Ow! Ow, Charlie! Ow! Charlie! No, Charlie bit me.
Charlie bit me. This video captured the hearts of all who saw it. It was uploaded 14 years ago and has been viewed 881 million times. The protagonists are 3-year-old Harry and 1-year-old Charlie. Rumor has it that the two brothers spent a joyful day playing in the garden, after which Harry, for reasons unknown, decided to put his finger in Charlie's mouth. The rest, as they say, is history.
No, Charlie bit me.
Cut to 2021. Charlie and Harry have grown up and are about to embark on a new journey of their viral video. The two brothers plan to auction their viral video as an NFT. What's that? NFTs, or non-fungible tokens, are digital assets that represent ownership of virtual items. They act as a certificate of authenticity for photos, videos, drawings, audios, or for that matter, any kind of digital files. The ownership of NFTs get recorded on a blockchain network, the same technology which supports cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. The Charlie Bit Me video will be recorded and sold on the Ethereum blockchain. The auction is set to be held on the 22nd of May, and on the 23rd of May, the video will be permanently deleted from YouTube. The buyer will become the sole owner, and will also get a chance to reenact it, along with the stars themselves, Charlie and Harry. This is not the first time a meme video is being sold in the NFT format. Remember this viral meme star who smirked at the camera as a house burned in the background? She's got all the reason to smirk now. Last month, Zoe Roth, the disaster girl, sold this image for a whopping $500,000. And how many of you remember this, the neon cat meme? Do you know how much this was sold for? $600,000. Who would pay such a sum for a digital asset? People like these. Vignesh Sundaresan, also known as Metakovan. Don't go by his casual looks. Mr. Sundaresan here is a blockchain entrepreneur. He recently paid $69.3 million for digital artworks in the form of NFTs. What's his source of wealth? His computer.
My idea is to build this industry because I think if this NFT industry is successful, that means it will open up this whole new world for a lot more artists and a lot more collectors. And I think the world will be a better place, right? So that's my intention.
So how big is the NFT market really? Taking into account the most recent transactions, it's worth billions of dollars. Last month, 2 images created on the CryptoPunks platform were sold for $7.3 million each. Does that mean anyone can create an NFT? Yes. Any internet user can go to a dedicated platform to upload any file they want to convert into an NFT. The fee charged is usually less than $30 per file. Once your file is on the platform, you can sell it. You can also set a percentage you want from all future sales of the file. The owner of the first NFT art gallery in New York offers a good explanation on why this technology could be the future.
This is the future. We're all betting on the future because NFTs allow for artist royalties. And that's the most important thing about all of this, is that if everyone gets involved and everyone takes this seriously, this can really live. This can exist. That's a world that keeps artists sustainable. That's a world that keeps artists making art. And it tethers them in a healthy way to the capitalism that surrounded the art world the entire time.
No, Charlie bit me.
Bureau Report, WION. World is one.
Charlie! Ow!
On that note, it's a wrap. We're leaving you as always with Gravitas Images. Thanks very much for watching. Stay safe.